biblical principles for framing culture at the personal level. Before we talk about culture at the macro, institutional level, what are biblical principles that should inform us at the micro level as individuals? What are those principles? After I've dealt with those principles, I'm going to give you a fine and a crucial distinction of how to distinguish two realms to think about culture. The one realm I call it an ethic, the other realm I call it an ethics. The difference between these two terms is the suffix s. Ethic, ethics. Right? Distinct, that's the second thing I'm going to do. That allow us to really identify what is crucial, what is decisive, identify what is important but not decisive. And that will allow us to think very critically about our cultural spaces. The last thing I want to talk about is the problem of blackness in the Adventist church.
Hey, you. Okay. All right.
Those are three things I want to talk about. Let's start with the first one. So the first one it's really to say that I'm a preacher, so I do forget this thing of philosophy. How does the Bible, or at least my interpretation of how to frame our personal lives as we think about culture? And I want to throw out 3 principles from the New Testament, 3 of them. And these principles are so decisive that they may even discourage you. So 3 of these principles that are going to frame how you think about yourself as a cultural being and the spaces that you navigate. So the first principle I'm dealing with, there's 3 of them. The first one is when Christ says, as you engage in the micro space, you engage with individuals. The very first principle from the 3 that I want to start with is the idea that love your enemies. As a Christian, as you enter into the world and you interact with different cultures, your entry into the world is that your point of departure is that your enemy is an object of love. And look, I'm going to submit to you that this is the lowest standard in Christianity. Don't think this is a high standard. If you're still struggling in that standard, you've not even entered the Christian journey. This is preschool, if we're going to use a language that you might understand. It's that you must love your enemy. The requirement is quite demanding. It's the requirement to love, not to like, not to be nice. The requirement is that as you enter into the world, you've got a duty towards your enemy. All right, so 2 duties. 1, you must not be naive to think that you're not going to have enemies in the world. Yeah. So you've got a duty to identify them, that you are my enemy. Yeah. And I've identified you as such. That's duty number 1. Duty number 2, now that I've identified you as my enemy, I've got another duty, the duty to love you. Maybe one day we'll talk about how to love your enemy. But for me, it suffices for now to say you've got a duty to love your enemy. And when Christ makes this articulation, he makes it with a particular, he justifies it with a theology. And Christ's theology is basic. When the sun comes out, God does not discriminate who believes in me, who doesn't believe in me. Every creation of God benefits from God because he's a being of love. It is not in the nature of love to discriminate. It is in the nature of love to remove all boundaries. So as a Christian, as you enter into cultural spaces, your duty is not to discriminate when you distribute love. It's a duty. When you distribute love, you have a responsibility to remove boundaries, to find reasons to love even those that are not desirable to you. Even those that pose the greatest threat to you, they must be an object of love. It is difficult to love your enemy. That is why often I encourage people not to become Christians, because Christianity requires you to do difficult things.
Yo.
Often I say, don't do it.
Encouragement.
I don't do it. Do you have the stomach to love your enemy? And maybe I should bring it closer home. So when I talk about an enemy, I mean someone who has slept with your wife is your enemy.
You.
Boss.
And they used your black card to book that room.
All right. What is it in your bread?
Well, it's a Cape card. Don't be too much into it. Don't be too much into it. They used your black Cape card to sleep in that room. And the Bible says the first thing you must do, you have slept with my wife, therefore you're my enemy. But I have a duty to love you.
Hey.
This is demanding psychologically. I don't know if you've thought about it. It is demanding psychologically. Someone who is your enemy in your psychological makeup, naturally, they occupy that community of those that you resent. And resentment is a psychological perspective you take of another. The Bible wants you to disrupt yourself from a perspective of resentment to that of love. And for someone to be someone that you love, there's a particular perspective of them you must have of them. Now, the Bible requires you to repent of the perceptions and perspectives that you rightly have. Suspend them. And they must emerge in you the willingness to love the person who has so wronged you. Kunzima, eh? It's easy. Let's not complicate it. And look, that's it. That's it. And Christ says this is not difficult. The sun, the rain, everything is evidence of God's faithfulness to those who are not faithful to Him. If God does it every day, you've got a duty to do it every day. This doesn't mean be naive, eat the food prepared by the enemy. You must love the enemy. Don't be careless around the enemy. Some of you might take this other extreme. Enemy, come to my house. I'm going away. Come. No, it doesn't mean careless. It just means that you must love your enemy. All right. So your enemy must benefit from you. Your enemy must benefit from your protection, if you can avail that. All right. So it's the lowest standard. It's the lowest standard. It's the highest standard. And this is how you think about the personal culture. The second standard, I'm rushing through these. The second standard is that you must love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, note the difference here. There's a shift here in thought. The neighbor and the enemy are two distinct categories. So you must be able to distinguish them. And the love of the enemy is not qualified. The love of the neighbor is qualified. You don't love the neighbor the way you love your enemy the way you love yourself. You just love him. His love is general. His love is general. Right? But the love of the neighbor is not general. It's particular. You love him the way you love yourself. So the standard of loving the neighbor is you. It's still not Christian. At best, it's Ubuntu. It's not Christian, that thing. So you could, if you're still failing with the enemy, there's still a higher standard where you learn to love your neighbor the way you love yourself. In other words, you become the standard. The way you think of yourself, the way you regard yourself, the respect you give to yourself, the priority you give to yourself is the same that you must give to another. But this often fails in our culture because many of us have not even started knowing how to love ourselves. So other people are victims because you are the first beneficiary of your victimhood. And then you extend it by failing to share it with others. So, second thing you must do, over and above loving your enemy, you've got a requirement to learn to love yourself. And when you are mastering that art, you'll be in a better position to love your neighbor. To love your neighbor. And then maybe the question might be, who is my neighbor? The Good Samaritan, right? Who is my neighbor? Right? In my interpretation, the neighbor is anyone, not everyone, anyone that you come into proximity with at any given point in time. So they asked Christ, who is my neighbor? A good Samaritan who is obviously a stranger meets a Jewish fellow. They have a contact. That contact creates a neighbor, and then it benefits this guy. That's who a neighbor. So a neighbor is anyone that you come into contact with. Immediately there's proximity, that person is your neighbor. And if they can benefit from you, they should. So the notion of a neighbor here, the notion of a neighbor has got something universal about it. It's not limited to geography. Anyone can be your neighbor. And this has got profound implications. It means that even a Zimbabwean is my neighbor. As long as I come into proximity with him or her. Alright? It's not about, and it makes us to look beyond the myopic cultural or tribal perspectives. You see what I mean? The requirement that we must go beyond those. Anyone that we come into contact with is my neighbor, at least in this interpretation. And I've got a duty to love them the way I love myself. And the biggest challenge about this one is not what I do for others. It's how high do I set the standard of loving myself. Often I find that the standard is dropped so low that our humanity itself becomes undermined. It's what I call the act of self-sabotage. Right? If we have time, we're going to get into details of this and all of that. But so that is the second one. As you engage into cultural spaces, think of the other as an object of love, precisely because you've reified yourself as such. So that's the second one. I'm still not Christian. So a neighbor, enemy, neighbor, the last one. The last one is Christian. More demanding. It's John 13, I think. Christ says, you must love one another as I have loved you. You see now it has changed. You love the neighbor as what? Love yourself. But you must love one another. And who's the standard now?
Christ.
The other principles are not necessarily Christian. The second one is called the golden rule. It's a universal principle. The third one is Christian. Why? Christ is the standard. Love one another as I have loved you. But now let's get into it. What is the defining feature of God, of Christ's love? What is it? Death. Death. But maybe a better term to use, the willingness to sacrifice for another. Look, I want to make it very simple. Very simple. This principle is contrary to the idea of convenience that characterizes our culture. The worst form, subtle, insidious, of evil, anti-Christian, is our commitment to convenience. That's what lies out of Christianity. He leaves heaven. Not only does he leave heaven, he leaves his status of divinity. Not only does he leave the status of divinity, he becomes human. Not only does he become human, being found as human, he became a servant. The kenosis, he keeps going down because he loves. It's about going down. So if we are thinking seriously about Christian culture, it's not about going up, it's about going down. Good. Now we're taking it elsewhere. The willingness to die. It's what is at the heart of it. I mean, I won't lie to you. I've been a member of this church for a long time. I've never seen anyone willing to die for me. People want a plate of let alone people who are willing to be hungry for me. Plate, food, take plate. People rather close me outside because I don't have a tie. Can't hear the word of tie. 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 I want to hear the word no tie. Where is the tie?
Hi.
It's because we've not understood how deep this thing is. The willingness to die for another. Don't call me Mzalwane if you're not willing to die for me. Don't. Call me any other thing, but not Mzalwane. The minute you say Mzalwane, you are making a declaration that our relationship is regulated by my willingness to die for you. But often we don't fail at the point of death. That is too high. You're not even willing to allow me to live. You're not even willing to allow me to live. You've got 50,000, you can't give me 1,000 rands. You've got 50,000, you can't give me 1,000 rand. You've got an extra room outside of your house. For your convenience, you can't even share that room for me. Ukhipha amathenda siyawazi. Siyawazi yawakhipha. Kodwa bonke abantu abaphayo kusabazalwane. Siyawazi. Ngaba nawe I'm your friend, ugqoka icathulo zabo 10,000, ngisasogola ngesicathulo sasephepha. Umngani wami, ngibona iyilip, ngibona uyaswiper. Let alone dying for me. Ngiphilele. Ngiphilele. That's all I'm asking. Dying might be too much. But just ngiphilele. Ngihlebulele isinkwa kwethu. That's what. So the death is really high. That is why Christ didn't begin by dying. Began by living. So that his death is a testament of his willingness to live for you. So these are three. Yeah, the one is this subpackage. There's one. Started up. I'm done now. Guys, I'm an ethicist. That's what I do for a living. I look for ethical principles. I'm paid to do that. So, they don't pay me well, but yeah, I try. I do it for free, yeah. I've been doing it for free for a long time.
That's a sacrifice.
When I'm willing to live for you. So look, so before then we start thinking about these other things, personally then we've got a responsibility. Some of you were failed by your father, by your mother, by your uncle while you were young. And that has been rolling you all your life.
Hey.
That is why wherever you are, you're a poison.
Hey.
You're not allowing that culture to be free to live. So before we can get deep into other things, free yourself from that poison.
Hey.
By loving your enemy. Second thing, you're very mean to people in the world. The way you love yourself, that's how much you must love others. The last one, the willingness to die for those that you call your brothers and sisters. Those are three things. Motivated and inspired by Christ. That I think should be the root of a culture thing about a Christian culture. Either way, when you come at the bottom is difficult because it is difficult either way. That is why I should be having elders and church clerks asking people who want to remove their names so that at least they can be free from this thing. Difficult. Imagine you get to heaven and everything you'll be discussing adultery and whether you didn't love your enemy. I don't want to know what you understand. It's my enemy exactly. That's why you're not going to heaven. Simple as that, your enemy. But this guy killed and did this. No, but you didn't love him. That's what we're discussing.
Hey. Hey. Hi.